we satisfied with this economy that is killing our innovation? When realizing this problem, we started to think about how to change it from the limits to growth. Nowadays, the academic has been arguing for half a century. For UNSCCC from 1995, it has been 25 years. 6 years ago, in Paris Agreement, you still have the memory. And also, every time it has set a target, but it seems that like to be an alarm for the lazy person. The goal has never been achieved. In 2012, Rogan Randers has written a book called 2052. He has revised the forecast from a Roman club. He said the world of 2052 will not collapse, but it will be smaller than we thought. Recently, we have also seen that the economic has been slowing down, and people start to break our fantasy about the development model. For the world, we are also suffering from global warming. The agriculture in the northern part of the world will increase their productivity. There will be a lot of poor population in 2050. The main reason is the short-sighted thinking and behaviors. These kind of issues is not crisis of the earth. All these are crises of people's survival. This picture shows on the nature from 1950 until now, the 7 critical value changes in the world. The green one means we are safe. And also you can see above the yellow, there are several red lines and the red zones. Sustainable Development Goals of United Nations, there are 17 of them, and now everyone has been acknowledged about that. However, human beings are very short-sighted. Sustainability transition has been sacrificed for the economic development and the prosperity. So we have been using our laziness as an excuse until the COVID has come. The world economic flow, human flow, our daily life has been suspended. For the sustainable transition, this is a huge opportunity. For example, in China, we have been talking about the soft landing, but now you can see it has been happening. For COVID-19, it has made the cat rivers, the 2 circles, and the relationship between the 2 has been released. And humans try to change their life, and it has become possible. After the pandemic, if we say that it is still the same world, how can we feel good about this? And also, how we can afford the sacrifice of the past few years. So we have to change. In 2018, Tongji University Press has published 2 books. We call it the Little Red Book and the Little Green Book. One is the reverse limit. Another one is called the calling of the new economy. It requires us to define our lifestyle and behaviors for the modern consumption. We have been some very habitual principles, for example, fast, large, new, high, expensive, convenient. All of them have shown under the quality what is a threshold and standard. All of them shall meet our current context. Due to the interest of time. So today I want to talk about one issue that is a re-understanding about the community. From 2015, I started to push the School of the Design and Art to be integrated with our neighborhood to break the barrier between the university and community. The question we want to ask at that time, for the community, whether it's the end of innovation or the source where it started. When we talk about innovation of the city, we think about the CBD, university, industrial park. However, we think community, it is possible to become the source. For example, that there are communities very close to our life, consumption. It is the scenario of application, careers, or it is very diversified. As is known to all that Silicon Valley was generated from the garage of the community. So today, My project is called NICE 2035. N refers to neighborhood, I is innovation, C, creativity, E, entrepreneurship. So when you put them together, it's called the NICE 2035. This project has a target is to fully leverage the spillover effect of Tongji University to build the prototype for the future life and to take the neighborhood and community to be the incubators for the creativity. This project was launched by our academy and Yangpu Street. We can divide it into several steps. The first one, the university and the community will be blurred with boundary. Before the pandemic, our school has already been open to the neighborhood. From 2015, we started to work with the local street and the neighborhood. Through our connectivity, we have collected the demand from all the stakeholders to improve the environment. After that, we have laboratory on the street. The most famous one is in the 2017. From 2018, in the Shipin Road, we want to take the whole valley based on the demand of the neighborhood to build into the future life prototype laboratory of NICE 2035. When meeting the local demand, we want to shift and apply to the research. We have a Fab Lab laboratory, sound laboratory, water laboratory, and other edge cutting technology. And for the Tongji, Aston Martin laboratory is very dramatic. In a very living line of the neighborhood, we have a laboratory for the future transportation. From this picture, you can see on top of the laboratory, it is about the clothes people are trying to dry. We also have some data-driven behavior analysis and on the website of the MIT Medium Laboratory. The whole neighborhood is about the future life. This laboratory is about their imagination for the future. We have the best talents. The output of the laboratory is not only about the prototype, it's also about the future companies. In 2019, you can see more and more young people come to work here. In 2020, then we have the pandemic, and pandemic has made us to know more about this project. So, for example, this project has not stopped, but it has moved further. For example, for the teachers during the pandemic, they couldn't go to university for 2 weeks. But for 2035, we take the city pandemic policies. So a lot of research results can be done in 2035. So for example, some laboratories we have were developed in the Aston Martin. So you can see that in the pandemic control, this equipment has played a very important role. That is the pangolin detection. For Eliott Cherubini, the creator of the Memphis, is very fond of this 2035. He said, as long as you can provide me good coffee, I would like to live in this laboratory forever. In 2020, when pandemic was better, with the support of the private sector, we have a cloud funding. And also, we also want to provide and rent 34 meters of the apartment and laboratory studio, and his design will be implemented in China. In 2020, they have their first cafeteria. Actually, you can see this cafeteria has been ranking the top in Yangpu districts. In 2020, by the end of that, he has his first punchline coffee. And he has also moved into his new apartment. And then his apartment has already become the mostly covered the project. The master has already become the icon of Chinese internet. Besides that, you can see we have Lu Zhou from the nice commune, who used to be my PhD student. He has 2 master's degrees from Tongji and Finland, and he dropped out of school because of the health, but he has been taking the responsibility of building this laboratory and communes. Punchline Coffee, we have Lu Zhou used to be my PhD student. He has a 2 master's degree from the Tongji and Finland, but he dropped out of school. After that, he took the operational responsibility. In this space, that we have a shared kitchen, shared dining hall, shared office, and some startups. Every week, there is new activity. By visiting this space, we have the Nobel Prize winner, university principals, the entrepreneurs, and investors. More importantly, we have common people and young people here. About the NICE 2035, we started to think about in the life science laboratory, how we can conduct more research. For example, data-driven community build, circular economy, the vegetable gardens, AI scenarios. By the end of 2020, the British Design Museum has selected NICE 2035 to be one of the cases of the post-pandemic. By the end of the 2025, we will have the NICE 2035 Chifeng Road. This Chifeng Road will be at the source of this 50 billion project. And now this design project has already become, based on this community innovation, it has led to the industrial innovation. Finally, based on the post-pandemic era, I want to talk about the significance of that. First of all, it's the importance of a reverse of the value proposition. For a very long time, we always think that for the high quality life must come from the center of the city, the best office building, best shops, restaurants, facilities, hospitals, all of them should be at the center of the city. But when the pandemic outbroke, this model has been challenged. When the pandemic was most serious, in the past, this kind of the office building, they don't have so much passengers, and people started to stay around where they are. So in their neighborhood, so some of the high quality life and high quality lifestyle has been destroyed. And you found that in your home and neighborhood, there is a big gap to fill in. So when pandemic has become common, even for about 15 minutes, neighborhood is too large. We need 5 minutes.
Still in your own community, we can imagine that if the resources of the city can be redistributed from this concentrated way, and we will encourage more distribution from the city center, district center to the communities as well as the buildings. So what will happen? Secondly, another disruption of the function of center, and we have recognized the value of the margins, then we'll have another disruption of the division of the functions. And we are now half a century away from the proposal of such theories, and they are centering on our own living community to work, entertain, and for other functions. During the pandemic, many people can work from home, which has not reduced the efficiency. On the contrary, the efficiency has been increased. But why should we go to the city center to commute and to be infected? So the 2018 commuting research by Tongji University, we found out that the average distance is 12.4 kilometers. Half of the people have have a commutation of more than 5 kilometers. And with this way of disruption, we can reduce the emissions and to improve the efficiency of the use of the time as well as the living standards. Last but not least, this is a re-understanding about the existing value systems to bring new hope. In July, there is this report about the master as well as the NICE 2030. And for the professor who lived in this very small apartment, now we have seen that this post was read by over 1 million times. So from my side, so we have providing a new solution for living in a city like Shanghai, so that for those who are very desperate for living in such a city to find new hope. So 34 square kilometers can provide you with the functions of dining, entertainment, working, and living for all those things that can be done in the community nearby. So this is a new scenario for our life. What's more important is that it can give you a better life, which is based on extremely low carbon emissions, which is more responsible way of living. In this post-pandemic era, what kind of world do we need? We may have many solutions, for example, to reconnect the society, our life and technology so that we can avoid the self-destruction. The most important link with the local place is to find the link with our life, to find an alternative to replace our existing economic model. So this is also the role that design can help to contribute to the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. Thank you for listening. This is the end of my lecture.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Professor Lou. It's the lovely project. I think the NICE 2035 is brilliant project and connect all the design topic with the city and such a great achievement. And since Professor Lou has this very tight schedule, so we don't have the discussion section about this wonderful speech. A little bit pretty, but we hope we have more further chance to discuss with you, Professor Lou. And now we're going to move to our next speaker, our guest speaker, Anna Barbara, who is an associate professor of interior and space design at the Politecnico di Milano and the founder of Science Lab Milan International Design Studio. Her researches are about relationship between sense, time, and space are developed in education, publications, and professional works. The most known publications are a new paradigm of spatial design, story of architecture through the senses, and invisible architectures. And Anna, may I hand over to you? And I'm very glad you be here and very much look forward to your talk.
Thank you very much to you, and to be here again for the second year to participate. Let me share my screen, sorry. Okay. Okay, I hope you see it. Just a second. Okay. Okay, so I want to show you some slides here. It's a problem, just a second. Okay, what you have just seen are the 400 personal jets with which the head of the states who attended at the opening of COP26 on climate changing landed to Glasgow. A paradox, isn't it? Now, yes, it is. What these segments of images show us is exactly what we have to avoid from now to save the planet, but fundamentally to save ourselves. Because one of the most serious problems is the concentration, the crowding, the coincidence of interest in one point that stressed space and resources. So what is increasingly evident is that in the recent years, we are called to design forms of time much more than forms of space. That this has become evident with the digital revolution, but even more because of the current pandemic. Designing with time is absolutely not new. 20th century, especially technologies, have been technologies of speed, of acceleration, but digitalization has led to other vertiginous movements, to abandoning of space due to co-presence, ubiquity, overlapping, increasing congestion of spaces and peaks of stress in infrastructure and spaces like this is a typical cross. This is the first problem that time-based design must address. Those who study the future must, of course, must consider managing the form of time and coordinating them is a necessary step toward sustainability. So, city infrastructures continue to suffer from this kind of peaks in demand. 9 o'clock, commuters clog the roads, causing traffic jam and mostly also accidents. And the same happen at lunchtime on the way home in the evening. So work in a flexible way, as we are doing during the pandemic, or as it is called smart work, we tested that the pandemic situation could be even a unique opportunity for all of us, for designers, because we can reschedule our time wisely, we can avoid overloading the city's infrastructure, and let's see, in the last few months, many of us have started to move around, going to office on alternate days or different times than in the past. So as well as reducing the risk of contagion, this practice allow us to better distribute also the traffic flow. So it doesn't take the place of attendance of our meeting with our colleagues, but it simply prevents us all from being stuck in traffic at the same time, or all at the same time in the cafeteria line, or all the same time in somewhere queue. So this is an interesting view of how we are really wrapping through time different projects. In fact, the world of hyperspeed and hyperconnection is congested and crowded, and everything happens, as I said, concentrated in the same focal point, connecting a system of discrete points. It is the evolution of the Cartesian space that was flat. Do you remember now the geometrical grid? And we are going through toward the compressed and stretched spaces that redraw new geographies, measures and distances, not only geometrical, but often also political and social distances. These maps are called anamorphoses and are created from a space measured not in meters or kilometers, but in minutes and hours. Sometimes they are measured in money, in euros and RMB. So in these maps, the distance measured in time are clearly show that the distances between places, cities get closer and further away, depending on the speed of transport infrastructures that innervate the different territories. So sometimes Milano is closer to London, for instance, than to its neighborhood. It takes less time sometimes to reach Paris by flight, by plane, than to go by car to our neighborhood. And frequently also it costs even less. So this is a paradox that we have to think about. Exploring, here there are many maps where it's evident how far is for instance, a neighborhood from the center of the city only according to the time roads. So exploring time, the different shapes of time, we will find also different geometries to be studied from the design point of view. Timeline, which is often how history is treated as a single line, or cycle, circular times linked to seasonality and cyclicity of small recurring event, or the molding times, which is the one that designed the formation of space over time. Now we are used to use, let's say, parametric softwares that are very interesting as a generative and parametric way of controlling and monitoring the changing of spaces into time. And also time is designed as a layer and stratification, or time stretching, that the time, the form, the size and the volume of the spaces according to the tension and also the performances required. Then we go to time sharing, and allows us to explore the city and the building as porous places, able to absorb a small growth and compression without collapsing the system. This city, that porosity is a term arriving from Richard Sennett, was the subject of a thesis done by a student of Politecnico, who actually is making his PhD in Tsinghua University, Zhu Hanshan, and he explored how in the surrounding of your university, but it's the same around our university, there are many spaces in the building that could accommodate students and commuters to offer small services, avoiding them having to commute continuously, with a considerable impact on traffic and on their life, of course. This would then be a time-based microeconomical system, because you can also earn money, you can use app. In this case, also digitalization affect a lot the way of managing this kind of spaces in time. So the sponge city, that is how it is called, provides empty space that serve as areas of compression and flexibility in space and time. From all of this, it follows that the city is full of spatial voids that are temporary, sometimes because they may have fulfilled their function, so they are only temporarily empty. So I'm not talking about the huge voids, nor the large dismissed areas. I'm talking about the huge subway stations sized only on the rushed hours. Or I'm talking about the rooms that we do not use during the day because maybe we are in the offices. So the building, so I'm going back, the building we design in the future will increasingly look like huge clocks, which will ask to synchronize the temporalities of activities and different communities. We can no longer afford monofunctional spaces. Buildings must be designed to be adaptable over time, since even when they are closed, they have energy and social and economical costs. We never think about it. We always design on buildings during their activities, and we never think how much they use energy when they are even closed. So a school, for instance, that is empty on night, or a railway station that is deserted for 90% of its time, those are forms of unsustainable waste. So using chronotops, for example, we can measure the on-off activities planned in the spaces. This analysis is very interesting because it allows us, for example, to understand how much there are oversized the space where we live in relation to their use and how to we resize them. And if you think about post-pandemic, for instance, offices, you understand how much important is this kind of evaluation. If we go and measure how much time people are using the offices, of course, it decreased a lot. And we need absolutely to think about how to reuse this kind of spaces. So for example, this slide is dedicated to an exercise given to my students, and I asked it to create a double spiral chronotops for representing their typical day, where one is the day and the second circle, the smaller one, is the night. And the color was indicating what they were doing, the activities. So you can see immediately, first of all, that even an homogeneous group of 20 years old students answered differently, where night begins, where day begins, where it ends, and so on. So consider the night to be the moment, they consider differently the night. For some of them, night is when they close their door, or for some of them, the night starts when the sun sets, or for instance, for some of them, the night starts when they just close their room and they can jump into their digital world. So this is very important because even a very easy cycle representation of the time is not obvious shared concept for everyone. So if we had this measurement to the digital dimension that integrates the real one, we understand that a person could stay physically in a place like in Milano and digitally living eventually in Beijing or in other places. So we have different chronotops that we are exploring as a tool for managing the time. These are chronotops of houses where you can clearly see how and when various rooms are used. So it happened that there is a lot of wasted and unused space during the day related to the place where we live. It's clear that the paradigms of design space, even in residencies, should be completely reversed than in the 20th century. Other chronotops, for instance, these other chronotops want to show a sort of time axonometry, what the proper sizing of a school should be, considering a space based on their actual use. Now, in fact, these if you think about our university and the potential of available spaces that could be offered to communities in terms of planning, you understand that we should completely rethink in the future how we design even the space of our schools and university. One interesting indication that emerged from this exercise, for example, is that many spaces could accommodate for sure many more functions than they do actually, simply by staggering the schedules, the programs. But this should be given to the designers, not at the end of the process as a managers, but this should be given to the designer at the beginning of the process when they start to design the space. So this is another chronotope, and name is Chronos and Kairos, and it's a project that I exhibited in the 2010 at the Biennale of Architecture in Venice, in which I tried to host a series of functions inside the Pirelli skyscraper in Milano that kept changing depending on the time of the day and night. Mostly, I was filled the building of services and spaces commuter-based to be 24/7 open. So this is the typical example, future failing strategies. When you design a park, never thinking what is going on when it is empty or when it's not used anymore. And this is another future-proof strategies when someone is thinking, okay, but how can eventually I convert that building in something else or hosting other functions? And here again, who designed a stadium? Does he think about the fact that a stadium is full only on Sunday afternoon, maybe even a Saturday, but of course completely empty for the rest of the week? What happened on the other days? Is an empty stadium a sustainable cost for the owners, but also for communities and for the Earth, the planet? And another chronotopes is, these are used on the dynamic exploration of movement through time in the space. And these are experiments by other Polytechnical students who have tried to unroll buildings as they were a movie sequence. And this is what happens in reality when we cross a piece of city or a region with a vehicle. Depending on the speed at which we cross it, the space is perceived in a completely deformed way. And this reminds me, Zaha Hadid was using to call her buildings car architecture, and car architecture because they had to be seen from a car, so at least at 40 kilometers per hour. This is another, how do we use the chronotope? We use a chronotope, for instance, in the project we are doing this year in the Ephemeral Design Lab, where we are exploring the idea of doorfront city. I've seen my colleagues before in Tongi, but also Professor Manzini today, the idea that we want to reappropriate the ground floor as places of communities and socialities, and not only for shopping and trading and driving. For this reason, we started to study the times of the neighborhood on which we are working in Milano, and we built chronotopes that would give information, for instance, about the difference between morning, day, and night along the same mile. And then we decided to explore the 15-minute service for understanding if there are enough for the population living in the area and how they can reach them. Other students explore the on-off activities of the ground floor, but also the time spent in the areas just outside the front door, between the street and the private properties, and also in what time slots, who, how they are using. And we also built maps of movement, speed and slowness, places that offer services, and the time the various communities, but also the diverse ethnicity, different populations are using those space. So we tried to understand, for instance, the outdoor furniture, when they are used, how, by whom, and if it feels safe or if a different configurations of the outdoor furniture makes the space more welcoming and inclusive. So we designed the time of residents to be tuned with the times of visitors, workers, and city users, and even the butterfly who needed to get back into the city center. And we're designing time-based design to use less space, to not require additional buildings to be built, but a better use of the time and those that already exist. So the last question for us is, could the chronotopes be tool for create a future? And as in filmmaking, where some movies design a multi-chronemic narrative, moving along stories, creative sequences, and developments capable of folding time and space according to compelling geometries. This is a very interesting narrative. How the narrative, the storytelling of some of these movies is designed is very inspirational for me and for us. The images that you see now come from an article published in a film magazine that I found recently, and I found it very interesting. There are movies that we all know as Interstellar, the Tenet, Inceptions, and others, where the story jumps around in time, back and forth, in a way that is sometimes almost impossible to follow. No, we have to draw our schema to follow what is going on. But it's interesting because it represents just that multitemporality that we are experiencing, even with the same feeling of the vertigo, no? And it's very interesting because this kind of representation or chronotopes also help us understand that there is not one present and not one future. It is evident that we are no longer speak of single time, but of various temporality that move at different speed and on different planes. The alternative presence, as well as the possible, desirable, probable futures, mentioning Gerabi and Dune, of a community or an economy or a country, do not move in synchronicity with each other. The future of one area of the world, of the planet, may coincide with the near past of another, or our present coincide with maybe a desirable future of someone else. So our future may yet happen, or perhaps somewhere it has already happened. So going to the conclusion, designing the form of time must not mean designing speed, but it will also mean designing rhythm, as Kevin Lynch, or designing slowness, as Richard Sennett. It will not have to mean designing only future for a small, rich elite. The competitive time we have experienced so far created a divergent future that we can no longer sustain. We will have to design times to be conciliatory, as Sandra Bofiglioli's research, to slow down if needed, again, as Richard Sennett, to decrease eventually, as Serge Latouche was writing in his book, or to be collaborative with close communities, as this morning Ezio Manzini was mentioning, and inclusive with futures capable of bringing together innovation and sustainable development accessible to the majority of the people. Thanks.
Thank you very much indeed. That was a fascinating survey. Wow, tremendous interested me. The wild spread and the different cases you covered. And I have a question for you, actually. Because because it's quite interesting, and you cover several cases about the time and the space, and really looking at the space in a different perspective. And my question is, how do you collecting those data, the time which connect the space? How could you and your student provide those amazing diagram?
Okay, it's indeed, at the beginning, we thought that we should go in some amazing research center or data mining center. Indeed, it's not true. We have already all this data in our hands. For instance, the on-off activities, you just, with your mobile, you watch all the shops along the street and you can know exactly when they are open and closed. And you have also information about how many people, how much is crowded or not. Or you can have surveys, or you can have information by the transportation systems. And most of the informations we have already and are easily reachable by any let's say, website related to the municipality. But of course, you can even explore. This year, the Ephemeral Lab is exploring 1 mile of the city. That is an axe, very interesting, where there are bikes, cars, transportation, subway. And so they are spending time into the area, collecting information on how people use differently the spaces related to the different times. This is evident during the day, during the morning, there are different population, different use of the space than in the evening. And sometimes the same space change completely according to the time and also according to the rhythm and according to the speed. So the fact that we want to focus the attention that in the future, really, especially because of the digitalization, we should design, first of all, the shape, the form of the time, because time is really wrapping and molding the space differently. Let's say the analogic generation, we were used to design on a very flat space where the only measurement was in meters. Now we cannot do it. Sometimes to go to London, it costs 15 euros. And taking a taxi from the university to the airport is like 25 euros. So if we immediately think how to measure according to the money, then again, there is something that is changing. So I'm a space designer, I'm an architect, I teach space to my students. So I have absolutely to be focused and to drive them on the attention about the time, because our, let's say, vocabulary now is filled of words related to time, no? Because
right, totally agree. Because it's happening. It's happening everywhere. We have this app on the cell phone is for order food, and when you look at the way they shows the store or the restaurant is not the actual distance from you, but the minutes, like 30 minutes or 25 minutes from you. So that's why I totally agree about the space wrapping. It's kind of different from the before you measure the place or the city using the meters or kilometers measurement. Totally agree. So it's really fascinating to see how you present the city space disordered, disformed by adding the time element into the city shape. It's really interesting. Wow. Lovely.
Can you imagine how much it changed the sense of community and proximity?
Yeah, right. Well, let's see, is there any question from the audience? No. Okay, so I think we have really good time shape, and thank you very much, Professor Anna, Barbara.
You're welcome.
It's such amazing and inspiring speech. And now we're going to move on our panel section. So our panel speaker, the first guest is Maree Conway. She is the founder of Thinking Future, and that is an organization that assists professionals, nonprofit, and the people in education and the government to plan the future. The most known publications of Maree is Foresight-Infused Strategy and How to Guide for Using Foresight in Practice. Welcome, Maree. Very much look forward to your talk.
Thank you. Hello, greetings from Australia. I'll just share my screen. And I'll just put presentation mode. Okay. So I'm going to be talking about a new framework that I'm developing at the moment to strengthen our conversations about futures. Thinking about futures and imagining possible futures and enacting those futures happens in the present. Riel Miller from UNESCO asserts that the future exists in the present in the form of anticipation, while Richard Slaughter sees it as a principle of present action, present being that can be understood, explored, mapped, and created, but not predicted. So a question then emerges, how can we construct a rigorous and systematic way to engage with, explore, and use the future in the present? So that's what my my presentation is about. So there are 3 topics. I'll introduce the futures conversation framework, then define the 4 conversations that make up that framework, and then finally how we might begin to start using the framework. So the background to this framework is my doctoral studies, and my thesis was on university futures. The framework integrates 2 domains, the individual and collective worldviews, which construct the invisible organization, and the observable inner and outer context of organizations. The framework also integrates existing processes to ensure that the domains are considered when designing foresight processes. So that's my focus. It's how do we design better foresight processes. It's still being developed, so detail later on may not be what I'm talking exactly about today. So this slide shows some existing foresight processes, and I'm just curious to find out if you can see if there's anything missing in these frameworks. I'll just give you a few seconds to have a look at them. You can see they're all talking about different stages of foresight processes. I just spend a few seconds thinking, can you see anything that's missing? They're all good processes, but for me, there's something missing. And that is that our assumptions about futures are missing. So mapping our assumptions of how and why and when we use the future in the present is needed in these processes. And success in surfacing those assumptions really depends on depth of knowledge and capability in practitioners who have identified their own assumptions about futures. So this is a summary of the framework. It draws on integral futures, which in turn draws on integral theory, which was developed by Ken Wilber. It's designed to ensure that any useful conversation about possible futures takes place in a space that is inclusive, collaborative, and participative, with a diversity of perspectives informing how those possible futures are understood in the present. So useful conversations are those that explore individual and collective beliefs and assumptions, social and organizational contexts in which those conversations take place, and identifying actions to be identified. So these are conversations that value imagination as a source of information about the future. So this is the integral frame that I used to develop the framework. Each of these 4 quadrants holds a different way of knowing the world, and all quadrants must be considered to the same degree if we are to broaden and deepen our conversations about futures. Usually we spend a lot of time in the organisation and society quadrants, not so much in the individual and culture quadrants. I'll just briefly describe each of those quadrants. The individual subjective, the upper left is a quadrant that constructs the intentional interior world of the individual. So this is where our hopes, joys, our dreams, our beliefs, our assumptions about the future exist. And we can only understand those if somebody chooses to share them with us. The lower left is about culture, and this is the cultural world of an organisation. So it's a collective space where individual beliefs and experiences are shared, resulting in collective meanings and the development of worldviews that generate shared meaning in an organisation. The lower right is the external social system in which an organisation exists, and it's the environment into which an organisation must fit itself in a strategic sense. The upper right is the empirical and observable organisation, its structure, its operations, its infrastructure, that kind of thing. So here we have the Futures Conversation Framework in its current form. And the left-hand quadrants are the domain of worldviews and focus on building individual and collective futures consciousness in organisations that over time constructs an organisational foresight capacity. So the ability of the organisation to make its decisions based on an understanding of futures that may be available to it, not just one single future that you find in a strategic plan. It's also about surfacing agency, our ability to act or not act in the present. The right-hand quadrants are the context domain, and they focus on building an organisational futures orientation, that is for the organisation to be aware of how futures are imagined, understood, accepted or rejected, and how to orient these conversations towards the organisation's possible futures. This is where we start to develop a long-term perspective in organisations. So we have 4 types of conversations here. The upper left is a conversation with ourselves about our assumptions about the future. In the lower left, the conversations are about culture. This is the organisation. How does the organisation build images of possible futures for it? What futures do they accept and what futures do they reject? And the lower right quadrant is about how futures explored. It's about what possible futures are out there for us. It's the space in which we undertake environmental scanning. We look for information about change, both at the organisational level, but also at the global level, which is a longer term type of change. And then the upper right quadrant is about conversations about futures which are integrating the outcomes of all the other conversations to ensure that the action taken by the organisation is relevant to its context and actually helps it achieve the future that it desires. Sorry, I'm not sure why that blue mark has turned up there, but I'll keep going. This slide shows how the conversations intersect with each other to construct an integrated conversation, a discourse about the future, about possible futures. We can see here the influence of assumptions on our conversations and the need to ensure that our tacit conversations, the one that we don't necessarily express in any way, are made visible to others in the organisation. We are looking here for open, collaborative, inclusive conversations that value all ideas and all futures that can be identified in the present. Now, I'm not going into any great detail about this at the moment because we need to get finished, but I'm happy to take questions on this. These conversations all look like they're separate, but they're not. In reality, they coexist and they influence each other. So this slide shows an early version of a way that could be used to make the framework practical. It starts with organisational commitment to using an integrated process and to accepting the value of using this applied foresight process in the organisation. The next column, theoretical base, shows what theories are being used to help develop the framework. The third column is about a basic primary question that we have to ask in each of those conversations. The fourth column talks about integrated indicative methods. So these are the types of methods that you would use when you are having these different types of conversations. The fifth column is about possible challenges you might face when you're trying to have these sorts of expanded conversations. And the last column is about deeper outcomes. This is about trying to develop an organisational foresight capacity, and it's a continuing process that develops and gets stronger over time. So this sort of implementation process, if you will, is something that I'm still working on. So this is putting it what I talked about in the last slide into a different view. It's about different ways of thinking about how to develop this framework and put it into practice. We map existing capacities, we develop new capacities, we design processes, we use and then implement the processes, and then we review and continue to build our capacity. Just a quick mention here of the work being done by UNESCO on Futures Literacy Labs. There's a link there that you can use to find out more about that. But they have developed this sort of process that I'm trying to develop now at the moment. And it's, as you can see at the bottom of the slide, it has three stages where we surface assumptions, we challenge them, and then we find new ways to think and act in the present. So what's the point of all of this? If it integrates existing methods and processes, is it really necessary? And my answer, of course, to that is yes, because what we have now is usually not integrated. So the invisible assumptions we hold, these have the power to constrain the emergence of our full range of possible futures that we can know in the present. And if they're not surfaced, our futures will remain trapped in the present. So my aim with this work is to try and expand and deepen how we understand the future in the present, to help us reframe the present, to find new actions that we can take so that we don't just keep repeating the same mistakes all over again. So I'll finish there. Thank you very much. They're my contact details, and please get in touch if you have any questions. I'll just stop sharing now. There you go.
Thank you, Maree. It's quite a complicated framework, actually.
Yes, I had to, I'm sorry, I had to go through it fairly quickly, but I am hoping that a more detailed paper will be published on it shortly. Yeah.
Okay, could you give us an example about how you make this work when you do the invisible side? It's kind of abstract to me. Yeah.
Yeah. In my work, well, that I used to do in workshops, I would always be on the lookout for what I call assumption walls, so that people would make a statement. For example, the most common statement people make when they're asked to engage with the future, which of course doesn't exist. And so people apply what they know to thinking about what might exist. And they make these statements because they have assumptions about what's right and what's wrong for them, and what they will accept and what they won't accept. So if I hear statements like, that's rubbish, or that will never happen, or that's ridiculous, that's what I call an assumption wall, because you're assuming something about a future that's being presented to you that doesn't exist and probably never will exist. So the point of it is to get people to stop and think about how they're thinking about the future, as opposed to just, sprouting their assumptions. I don't have any case studies yet. Ultimately, I'll be trying to prototype and use it, and then there'll be some case studies. But for me, the UNESCO process that I mentioned right at the end, the Futures Literacy Labs, which you can find out about on their website, is the best case study, or case studies. There's like 100 case studies of where they've used that process. So that would be the best place. Yeah.
When you practice this framework, what's the most difficult part for you to use this?
Again, it's there were the invisible side and the invisible side. It's the most difficult part is always the invisible side, because it's not a space that in our current world and our current environment that we spend much time in. When I used to do a lot of strategic development work, so writing strategic plans and that kind of thing. And when you do that kind of work, well, when I was doing it, which was a little time ago now, we'd never talk about people's assumptions, and we never talk about the organisation's culture, or if we did, we'd talk about it quite briefly. And we wouldn't spend too much time there. And we'd spend all our time thinking about the external environment, which you have to do, it's very important, and then looking at change, analysing change, and then bringing that into conversations about, well, if we think this is going to happen, then this is the sort of action we should take. So the problem with that for me always was that you can have the most, the most brilliant strategic plan, one that looks really nice and it's glossy and everything. But if the people in the organisation who have to implement that plan haven't been involved, and the organisation doesn't know what they're thinking about futures, and the culture of the organization isn't ready to expand its understanding about futures, then the plan will fail. And lots of strategic plans fail. And I think that's because people don't spend enough time in those invisible parts of the organization.
Okay, my background is architecture design. So when we study the architecture, we also use some psychological survey for know people's desire. Do you think, is there any difference or similar parts with your study?
The psychological testing kind of thing? Is that what you meant?
Yes.
Yes. I mean, I think those sorts of tests help us understand better how we think. There is a test already called the Futures Consciousness Test, which is run from the University of Turku in Finland. And that's specifically designed to help us understand how we think about futures. But psychology, I mean, foresight and our ability to think about the future is fundamentally a neurological process. And then the psychological process is attached to that our motivation, our openness to experience, our time preference, because we all have a preference for thinking about past, present, or future. Those kind of psychological attributes are really important. And I know there's tests for them, but I haven't got to that yet. Yeah, I know about the Futures Consciousness Test, but that, yeah, in terms of testing, that's the only one I use at the moment.
Okay. Thank you very much. It's a brilliant work, and I'm looking forward to look more details about your work. I'm going to look in your website. That's my.
There's a little bit of information, but I'll post my paper there. Fingers crossed if it's published.
Oh, it will. Definitely. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Okay. Now we are going to move to our next guest. It's Shi Danqing, who is Associate Professor, Deputy Director of the Information Arts Design Department, Academy of Arts and Design, Tsinghua University. He also is a well-known new media artist that produced a great many of art pieces related to art, design, and technology. Welcome, Danqing, and over to you.
谢谢梁老师，我开一下我的。
Thank you very much, Professor Liang.
Can
you see my screen? Yes, we can see your screen. So this is my PowerPoint, right? Yes. Thank you, Professor Liang. Dear teachers, dear audience, good evening. But maybe you are not in the evening, and depending on where you are, good morning. I am from the Academy of Arts and Design, Tsinghua University, and the Department of Information Arts and Design Department. I'm Shi Danqing. I would like to share with you on the title of Realverse, the new space for art.
So originally it's the universe, the new space for art. But I think I'm going to talk about some of the projects I've been doing related to the space, design, and practice. So why I add the word of the realverse? Because recently, when talking about the universe, everyone was talk about the mega universe. or megastars. So here I want to say that I'm talking about the real universe that will look into the sky. That is something that you can see. So we will try to see how we then find the new space, and it's also related to the topic we have for this session. So when talking about the space, I shall say that for the thousands of the years, when you look into the star, when you look at into the sky, it is a boundary of our imagination. It is also that when we look into the universe, there are so many artistic creations which has generated from the universe. But until recently, when human beings in modern era, they have the aerospace, rocket, spaceship technology to really go to the universe. So art has also been brought into the space. And compared with the Earth, this is something that is really imaginary. So I think that when talking about the new space for art, there is 1.0. The 1.0 here means that how we can bring the art to the space, because this is something very meaningful. And when you bring the art to the space, it is technical, it is also symbolic in art. Actually, for a very long time, from 1965, when human beings died in the space, the first artwork was by the Soviet astronaut that to use the color pencil to have the first painting in the space. So you can see that can be almost be seen as the sunrise in the outer space. That was in the 1965 until the 1971 Apollo 15. All the astronauts, David has brought a very small statue and placed it on the moon. Maybe it is the statue or sculpture, which is a forest from the Earth, which is used to memorize the people from the Soviet Union and from the United States, the astronauts who have died to explore the universe. In 1977, I think when we were young, you can read the case that the navigator or traveler number one, they took a golden plate of the script, and which has collected all the film image about the sea, wind, languages, tape, music, art, sculpture, sound, everything from the earth. They take it from all traditional art from the world, to the world. So Danqing, are you playing your PowerPoint? No, we can't see. We are still on the page 1 of your PowerPoint. It's stuck.
现在是可以的。
哦，那抱歉啊，那我刚才已经过了。我现在如果我现在放大，我现在切换页面能看到吗？
好的，嗯。
哦，那抱歉，那我快速的过一下刚才说的第一幅太空的绘画作品。
So the first one, you can see that this is a very small statue we have. And also that from the traveler number 1. So these 3 are the very typical, that is a statue, and also brought to the space. In recent years, we have also seen that the artists working with all the space agency, all the new installations, and the modern art, all of them are taken to the space. For example, in 2018, that by the light film material, the statue by SpaceX to the universe. And then 3D printing in the space to turn people's life into all kinds of the artistic work in different shape. We also have the orbit weaver. This is a graduate from Tsinghua University doing Liu Xin, that at the zero gravity to have the performance of the dance. So we can say that the space has become an expansionary space we have. But now what I would like to talk about is from other perspectives. So from the 2.0, the power, no matter it's the statue or the art creation or artwork, all of them actually are very edged or marginalized. But how we can popularize of the space art? You know, the mask, the SpaceX, and the recent projection of that. I think they have something similar. That is to let the space travel to become less unaffordable, less luxury, and to let common people to make it affordable. At that time, how we can consider about the space art and how to popularize the space art. So now I would like to share with you about the 3 cases about 10 years ago when I was in the United States. So that was my first step in the art creation in 2009. At that time, I have an opportunity that NASA, together Rhode Island Art Institute, NASA has a plan that by 2020 or 2030 to be back to the moon. So artists can play a role in this back to moon program. As you know, that people on the ground, we have about 384,000 kilometers from the moon, which is very, very far away. At that time, my proposal was that I hope that next time when you go back to the moon, it's not only the astronauts or the professionally trained staff to do that. We hope that everyone has a chance to step on the moon. So it sounds to be quite impossible, but that was my urge at that time. And benefiting from the digital art or installation, as well as the scientific research, we try to make it into possible. So what I have done at that time is that we have designed a real pair of the moon boots. On the surface, the moon boots is just similar as any regular moon boot. But at the bottom is quite different. I have designed a mechanical sole that changes the pattern. So the pattern will be changed. So you can see they can have all the different patterns or the symbol of the letters or numbers. So for example, for the moon boots, we have generated idea from an internet story. You can see the resolution at that time was very low. Each of the player, as long anyone, you have an opportunity that in this game to get an identity. And how do you identify your identity? It is based on the everywhere that you step on the moon by your footprint. Everyone, your footprint has a special number. So you can see it's like a barcode or the QR code actually is about their name and also the birth date of you. So it will be decoded. And in this game, there are a lot of mechanisms, but I couldn't go to the details here. But you can see there is a winner there for the game. The name of the winner and their barcode will be forever memorized on the bottom of the boot. So next time when they raise their feet, you can say, for example, Danqing SHI, you may see my name and also the barcode we have. So of course, according to the logic of this game, next time when people are going back to the moon, the first step, maybe it will be a boy from India or an old lady from Japan. But I hope that through this kind of the regional or the digital way, we can put this virtual moon taking to the real moon. So to a certain extent, everyone have the opportunity to leave a footprint there. Maybe that footprint is not you stepping on that. So in 2009, that was a proposal we have of the artwork. In 2014, after I came back to China, I also have an opportunity. You know that in China, China has also landed on the moon. Chang'e number 4 lander. At that time, there was an opportunity. There was 3.2 kilos of the extra load. So which is open for the world. They want to say that besides all the scientific equipment I have, now we have an extra of 3.2 kilo. What shall I carry to the moon? So at that time, we took the students and the team, how we can make artwork on the moon. We hope that it's not some artwork to be symbolic alone. It should be interactive with the people on the ground or every day that it impact about the life on the ground. So there is an idea, and we say that what will be one day on the moon will be about what happened if we put a sundial on the moon. So you can see that in the Tsinghua, at that time in Tsinghua, we have a cross-disciplinary team. We have the students from the mechanical, from the computer. They have researched a team that about the sundial when landing on the moon, how they can correct its direction to meet the ideal direction. So based on the sundial, we have a camera and to take the picture of the sundial. So on the land that people can use their cell phone and also to be connected to the sundial or the moon dial, I can call it. So one day on the moon is 1 month on Earth. That's why we call it a lunar calendar. So many of the traditional culture of China can be seen from this kind of direct live casting or streaming of the moon dial. At the same time, we also have some other machines. So for example, if you want to say, I wish someone is happy birthday. So on that day, at that moment, you can put the person's name there and you can get a picture there. You can see that the sundial's perspective is what time, and then it will be given back to be a birthday card and to send the best wishes from the moon. This is also very meaningful. So we hope that through this kind of equipment, we hope that the moon on the air will not be something independent or very far away or very imaginary. We hope that it can be connected to our daily life. But due to all kinds of reasons, technical limits, constraints, or the timing, this project actually has been selected into top 3 from several hundred candidates. But I think we have opportunities. We are very promising in the future. After about a few years, last year, we have another opportunity for our artwork. During the art creativity, I feel that for the technology improvement, in 2009, like I said, I was in the United States. So NASA has this combination offer of the art with the astronomy. At that time, I thought that this is a once-in-a-life opportunity with such a technical support. But after I went back to China, you can see that the spaceship has also been opened to China last year. Actually, we have been working with the domestic private aerospace companies to see whether they can have an art satellite. And This art satellite is a music box. We call it the Cosmusica #1. It is the first musical instrument satellite. So it is a little bit delayed, but it should be by the end of this year and the beginning of next year. This satellite will be sent to the space. The white one is part of the satellite. But you can see this artwork is only a very small one. You can see there is a very, very small box and a small transparent, small camera. This small box is what we call the Cosmusica music box. On this satellite is about 5 centimeters by 5 centimeters. There is a small orange ball. Because of the zero gravity, it will be floating there. With the satellite to make all the move different angles, the ball will have different kinds of the floating status. The camera will catch the moment, transmit the signals back to the Earth. So you can see that this is something installed on the satellite with all these kind of the aerospace material, high temperature, the cold temperature test. So when there is a music box in the air, in the satellite, how we can make people on the ground to feel and engage into this kind of space travel or the charisma. So with a music box, we try to plan to build the concert hall. So in the air, in the satellite, is about 5 by 5 centimeters. And also on the ground is about the 10 by 10 meters. And then there will be a lightning ball. So you can see that in our music hall, that this ball is moving up and down, actually is synchronized with the small ball that on the satellite. So you can see it will be very interesting because they are moving synchronized. At the same time, all the satellite which has been collected about this wave, because if you by ear you can't hear anything, but if you have all kind of the gamma and also that the sun and also the sun wave, all this kind of the data will be shifted. So this kind of the shifting of the music, we have been working together with the teachers and professors that from the music college. We want to make sure that they are the music. We also want to make sure that it can meet all these characteristics of the space travel. So the relationship of that with the public is that it has been about 1.5 hours. So you can see, you can imagine for our session, it has been going on for 1.5 hours. If our satellite is very successful in the orbit on the air, every 1.5 hours, it will go around the Earth. So that means from when we start the meeting until now, it may go from the top of our head 2 times. On the one hand, it can bring you the sound from the space. It will also collect the sound from the Earth. So it will catch all the cities, different countries, and also the radios. So it will mix art. On the one hand, it is a sound from the space. On the other hand, it's a sound from the Earth. So it can make people to listen to the universe.
The last one, which has just happened not so long before, this is a project launched completed a week ago. It's a workshop which has, so that's one of the very important segments of the Tsinghua International Conference on Art and Design Education. It was called the 2071 Zero Gravity Fashion, a guide to wearing in space. So we made 2071 here, that is 50 years from now. So it is not very far away, but it is not the near future that we're going to see to become real. So what we are talking about here is that after 50 years, so space traveling will become a new normal in a zero gravity or low gravity context. Fashion or what the clothes are going to be like, because so today's spacesuit, no matter the spacesuits of the major powers in the world or for individual companies like Elon Musk's company, those spacesuits are worn by the staff. So it's more like a uniform for them. So in our department, we worked with the Department of Fashion Design to integrate industrial designing as well as other new materials departments in the university to envision that in the future, when more people are traveling in the space, what the fashion will be like in the space, because in the zero gravity, there is no real up and down. So there are many scientific theories behind it, that how can we make it fashionable or beautiful, good looking and stylish. In this workshop, we worked with the company. So those are the spacesuits worn by our 3 astronauts in the space now. And the expert was explaining us the materials used for the spaceships and why the materials were used. So through this very serious knowledge learning, so we can envision in 50 years. Of course, this is a this is not a matured idea, but here, so some students proposed that when we were bathing in the space, or when people reside in the space after long distance traveling, what is the nostalgia? I think one important thing is that 70% of the things in the on the Earth are made of water, so we're going to miss water. In the future, if I'm going to live in the space, if I'm going to open up a spa club or a bathing shop, so water will continue to be a scarce resources, though there will not be a pool for you to bath in. So then we designed this system, so with these 2 layers of membranes, then the water will flow over your skin, then you will feel like that you are bathing. And one interesting thing is that they have designed this valve system, how to let in the water, how to let out the water. And on the chest, on the bubble, on the chest, you can add like the traditional Chinese herb or essential oils. So we joked that it will be very similar to our daily lives in northeast China. So how do we transplant that experience to the space? Because of zero gravity, because of the scarcity of water resources, because we need this kind of way of shower, then if we are going to develop a new bathing suit, then what it will be like. So that's the first prototype that they have developed for the bathrobe used in space. There is another group of students who designed this wedding dress in space. So of course, with more people in the space, some will get married in the space. One very important and interesting here is that they will compress the gas. So and the gas will be pumped into this lace-like systems. Then with the gas, of helium, so it can help you to be used in the wedding dress. If you are going to get married and have a wedding ceremony in the space, then you will have this very beautiful wedding dress, which is going to be spreaded in the space. So when we're envisioning the wedding ceremony, the funeral, a group of students said, after 50 years, when more people are in the space, it is very it will, of course, we will see people pass away in the space. Are we going to burn the body, or how do we keep the body? A group of students developed a piece of clothes for people who are going to pass away in the space. So the inspiration came from the falling stone on the earth from the space. So because they took this idea from the falling stone to design this piece of clothes to the deceased people in the space. So it will be designed in the shape of the human being, whether the bodies will be frozen in the space, or how do we deal with that? So when it passes through the atmosphere, it will become a meteor or the shooting star. So it will signify the end of the life. So we can see that through all those projects I have introduced to you, as more people march into the space, when the space is becoming ever more nearer for us. Of course, the space belongs to the research field for the researchers, the astronauts, the governments. But now, as more people are marching to the space, then at this point of time, we can envision and we can interfere in the space. So this will be a very unlimited and infinite space for art and design. Everything on the earth can be redesigned in the space, in the universe. So here today, I share with you about this theme, about the space and art and design. Thank you. Thank you, Danqing, for your presentation about the music box. It rang a bell about the Rescue the Future in the Star Trek. So because they would like to stole a humpback from the past. So I recalled that. So in that movie, it told us that we need to protect the earth, the natural environment, so that in the future we're not going to be threatened by all the hazardous events. So when you are developing these projects, so one thing that you would like to do is, in addition to build an artwork, what would you like to express from your works? So not a very specific artwork, but I think I'm very interested in the scales. So I didn't provide you with the image for a satellite flying to the sun, and it took a picture of the earth. It is a small blue dot. So under that scale, many things have become not important at all. So this is very interesting for me. One example is that just now, so from the example of the satellite, so it can it will orbit. So the satellite will orbit the Earth every 1.5 hours. So for this speed or in the scale of the Earth, so which seems to be compressed and became smaller because your perspective gets larger. What I'm interested in is that for a very small, for very micro creature like the mankind, how do we perceive the universe, or the space and the time and the universe in Chinese? The most original or the primary motivation is, of course, that so we will have an artwork in the space, and when the rocket is launched. So it is a very significant moment. But under that scale, when we are thinking about a lot of things, it will be very different than in a local place on the Earth. So in the space, it will be quite different, which means that when you put people under that scale, they will have a different perspective on space and time on Earth, right? So they will get totally new understanding, which can help them to change their perception and the perspective about the things around us. So of course, this is a very, so our perspectives as designers or artists are very different than those who are scientists. So the next question is that, when you took all those students to design the space suits, so for our students, when this very young generation, when they are for these very young designers, what are the very interesting ideas emerged from them? All right, so I will take this workshop as an example. It lasted 2 weeks. I worked with Wang Yue and the professors from the Department of Fashion Design. So how can we make the students totally immersed in this environment? So we need to develop a scenario or story. So in the beginning, I don't ask them to envision a very specific costume or the form of the spacesuit. Instead, we would like them to develop a character. I would like to design a person who is a very artistic person who is going to the space and get married in the space. So in the beginning, so we're going to discuss the character. So behind this, in our expert panel, we have our professional astronautic experts. So when we are envision and design those characters, so those are the experts' work. Our students very quickly, they can develop a scenario. Under that scenario, it will be very easy for them to start with the design work. So I think in the first, several days ago, I saw there was an interview. I don't know whether you remember it, like several years ago, like a decade or 7 to 8 years ago. Wang Yaping, who is a female astronaut, who delivered a science popularization class to the students on Earth. For our students in the Music Box project, they all remember that class. For our younger generation, for our young people, it is very, we are going to motivate them and to contribute to our future. So that's something that is very interesting for me. Thank you, Danqing, for the sharing. Thank you very much. And we are very looking forward to the music box to be launched into the space. So it is a project under implementation, right? So what is the schedule at the end of the year or the beginning of next year? So you have to share that good news with all of us. And then what about the music hall on the ground? Actually, that will be, it depends. It will be a not very large project, but we are going to do that locally. So it will be a space installation. We're very much looking forward to your future projects. And I think, how to say?
Speechless.
So I think this is something that is very inspiring for all of us. So our artwork can also be put in the space. Thank you very much for the sharing and your speech. Thank you.
Let's move to the next guest. Our next guest is Matthieu Cherubini. I hope my pronunciation is right. Matthieu is a Swiss designer now living in Beijing. He currently works for Volkswagen Group Innovation Center Asia. His research focuses on examining the implication of artificial normal agents on our domestic and everyday lives, both today and in the near future. His topic of tonight is designing ethic of autonomous systems. Welcome, Matthew, and over to you.
Hi, thank you. Let me share the screen. Okay, can you see and hear? Yeah. Yeah, so yeah, thanks ICDF to invite me to this conference. So I will present to you the topic of designing ethics to autonomous system. A very quick presentation about myself. As it was said, I'm currently working for Volkswagen Group Innovation Center Asia in Beijing as a design technologist. On the side, I've more working on art or design related project for exhibition, for example. And before that, before coming to China, I was doing a PhD by project on machine ethics at the design interaction department at the RCA, and which is the topic I will present to you right now. First, maybe just a quick definition of design future, because of course there is different people, different designer with different interpretation on what it means. I think for me, working in the industry, the one I'm faced constantly is the design future from the industry. What they want is to find new innovation. So they want to find new product, or new type of ideas, so they can be more competitive towards other people in the market. But for myself, or for this research particularly, the idea of what I understand by designing future is anticipating potential issue caused by new technology. So in other words, to try to look at emerging technology and try to guess what issues could come out of that, and how can you design a product that could avoid that these issues are coming once it's launch into the market. So first, what is ethics? So I'm sorry, I think probably a lot of you knows that already, but in case you don't, I just want to say a few words about it because it's important to understand later. So I will start with this very famous thought experiment called the trolley dilemma. So there's a trolley going down the road, and imagine this trolley is going to kill 5 people, and you are standing next to a lever, and you have the choice to pull the lever. If you pull the lever, the trolley is going to go on the right. Right or left? Yeah, right. And it's going to kill 1 person and save the 5 lives. So what should you do in this type of situation? So of course, if you ask this question to audience, people have different answer to that. Some people will say, okay, it's better to save 5 lives out of 1, so I will pull the lever. Some other people will say, I prefer to not be part of an action that involves the killing of someone. So to put it simply, ethics is principle. So what as a human you judge morally good or bad to do, that will govern your behavior or the conducting of a specific activity. And usually there is no right or wrong per se, there is only different perspectives. So people have different culture, they have different religion, and depending on that, they have different way at looking at things. And we cannot say that, for example, in this trolley dilemma, that pulling a lever is better than not pulling it. It's just people with different perspective and view on things. So in normative ethics, these 3 main categories. The first one is consequentialism. Here you are more looking, you are more judging if an action is morally good or wrong, depending on the consequence of that action. So for example, utilitarianism is the greatest good for the greatest number of people. So for instance, in this trolley dilemma, people who say it's better to pull the lever tends to be utilitarianistic because they are looking at the consequence, which is saving 5 lives is better than saving 1 life only. Then you have deontology ethic, which is a more rule-based type of ideology. So it's more about following rules. So for example, again, in this trolley dilemma, people would choose maybe to not pull the lever, maybe tend to be more on the deontologistic view, because maybe, for example, their religion dictate them that they should not be involved in an act of killing. Therefore, they cannot, they don't want to make that actions. And finally, you have virtue ethics, which is a bit, here we are more looking at the agent. So it's not about, we don't care about how the action is processed, what the output of this action, what we care about is really the agent. So it says that if this person reach a certain number of virtues, so for example, honesty, courage, compassion, generosity, no matter what it will do, the action will be morally right or wrong. So this just will illustrate that in ethics, yeah, you have this different view and the different way to judge whether an action is morally right or morally wrong, and there's no right way to say, okay, religion is the right way to go, or utilitarianism is the right way to go. It's just different, again, different people with different view. So why it matters when we speak about product design, or designing a product, because as you know, more and more the technology is becoming more and more highly autonomous, and is going to face a more and more like a very complex and human world, and therefore it will need at some point the ability to make ethical reasoning. So some example of this product, just to illustrate, for example, the most famous one I think at the moment is a self-driving car. So self-driving car, if they're involved in a car crash, they might be faced with ethical reasoning, because they have to choose, for example, who is going to get injured or who is going to get killed into a car accident. I will speak more in detail about this specific product in a while. The second product I want to speak about is, for example, in healthcare. So imagine, and this was a research done by some researcher. So imagine the task is very simple. You have a robot that has to deliver a medication to a patient. So I think, okay, that's a very simple task, right? But actually it was way more complicated than that, because, for example, what will happen if the patient rejects to take the medication? So here you have an ethical dilemma, because in one hand you have the duty to respect the patient autonomy. You have to respect his choice that he doesn't want to take the medication. But on the other hand, you have to respect as well his health. So how do you deal with the situation? So if it's a human doctor, through us as humans, through speech, we can maybe probably arrive to some type of consensus. But if it's a robot dealing with this situation, how do you design the robot to navigate into this type of very human situations? The last example is not really ethical decision making. It's more about choice, but I still want to show it, to show like even a very dumb product as a thermostat, for example, could face this kind of conflict. So imagine, and you probably live this situation already, you're in a room with another person, and you want to, for example, to have the AC on, and the other person want to have the AC off, and therefore you will start to argue what to do. And again, through speech, and you will find, you will take a decision and do something. But now imagine that this thermostat is fully autonomous. So if it can feel the desire, wish of different people, how it should adapt to the situation and make the adequate decision. So now if we take this previous definition of ethic, principle that govern the person's behavior or the conduct of activity, and you replace person by product, and you keep that constraint that usually there is no right or wrong, only different perspective, then you come to this following question, that how do you design something as subjective as ethics into a product aimed for a diverse market? So for example, which ethical ideology should you put into the product? Should it be utilitarianist? Should it be based on religion? So what exactly are you, or are you going to design the system? Who is going to decide for it? Is it government? Is it the industry? Is it, do you give choice to the user to share, to select what he wants to do? Should this product adapt to various ideology or cultural context? So if a product is exported to another country, should it be able to adapt its ideology to the country it's going to behave in? So yeah, I think in short, what it means is how do you design a product that is able to ethically behave properly in a human world? So now we'll show you a more, try to show you more concrete examples. So this is the case of autonomous vehicles. As I say, it's probably one of the most important autonomous product that is now might now be faced with ethical decision making. So of course, the point of autonomous vehicle is to bring you from point A to point B the safest way possible. Is not to kill or injure anybody, but unfortunately, it will happen. Yeah, we saw already that Tesla, when it's in autonomous mode, there's accident. So of course, autonomous vehicles are not completely going to make accident disappear. Accident will always happen, right? Because the world is complicated and things will happen. So imagine that you have, for example, a car, and it's going to, it's detecting, it's going to go into a collision, and it's detecting maybe that these 4 outputs output possible. It could turn right, it could go straight, or it could go left, and different type of collision could happen. I think this is a very important point compared to a human accident. As a human, if we make an accident, we just panic. We see the thing happening and we panic, and then we do something stupid, and the output is completely random. But in an autonomous system, it's very different because you have sensor in the car, you have the computer running, and of course the computer doesn't panic. So if it detects that, it has a split millisecond or maybe 1 second to take a decision and do something. So what should we do? And imagine as well that you can couple that with some type of simulation, which is, for example, used in accident research, such as finite element analysis, where you can really have a quite accurate estimation on, or depending on the mass, the speed, or the car is going to deform, and therefore, or it's going to affect people inside the car, and what type of bones it could break, or what type of injury you could have. So imagine this happen. Of course, in the best case scenario, the car is detecting a lot of output, and maybe one of these output is going to be a proper one where nobody is injured. And actually, I believe that this would be a very strong point of autonomous vehicle if they could really do that, because this would be really way safer than human being. But the issue comes when, the issue comes when actually there is no proper answer that any type of output which is detected could lead to an injury. So there, what do you do? So again, that's where the ethical dilemma arises, because there is no proper output. So how can you choose what is the best things to do, and how do you design that into a system? So the first project I want to show you is ethical autonomous vehicles. It's a project I did in 2012 to try to illustrate this issue. So here, the idea was to design 3 different types of algorithm or ethical ideology, and put them into a car, into a simulation, and see how it will behave under a different scenario. So the first ethical ideology was a humanist ideology. So it was more looking at trying to share the damage fairly among all participants and try to avoid a weaker part of the population, such as, for example, elderly or kids, to be affected by the accident because they are more weak and could be more easily have a big type of injury. The second algorithm was a profit-based algorithm. It was more looking, thinking that, okay, what happened? Maybe we have insurance, and you buy your insurance, and this insurance will define how much money you could spend on a given type of accident. So, and then it will pick the best output, falling into the range of the money you spend for that accident. And there was as well a concept of person of interest. So, for example, the question of if you have the president of a country running, should some type of people have more advantage than other? Of course, when you ask this question, everybody say no, everybody should be equal, but already in reality, it doesn't happen, right? Because if you have a lot of money, you can buy a very expensive car, which is usually more stronger and more safer than if you buy a very cheap car, where the material is more easily to get deformed and hurt you. Yeah, so this actually there is no fairness already now about the type of car you are buying. And finally, the last algorithm was a protectionist algorithm. Here it was more looking that try to keep the user safe at all costs, but it doesn't care who else is on the road as long as the user inside the car are safe. So here the idea was more about trying to find to define ethic as a commodified features inside the car. So, for example, you can go to a car shop and say, I want a blue car which is protectionist, or I have that much money, I want to buy a very big insurance so I can always be safe inside my car, and add this profit-based type of ideology into my car. Another project I want to show you still about autonomous vehicle. This was done by MAP Project Office from London. And here they were more imagining a type of dial inside the car. So the idea that the user has control about the ethical ideology that the car should run on. So, for example, one day maybe you drive and you have a kid and you feel like, okay, I want to be a protectionist because I want to keep my kid safe at all costs. But maybe someday you feel like a humanist, and then you can switch this dial, which is a bit like the dial you have now In some car, you have an eco mode where you care about the environment in some way, or a turbo mode where you don't care, but you care about the feeling of speed. Yeah. And finally, a last project about this autonomous vehicle I want to show you is this one was done by TIG. Here, the idea was that different city or different area on the city will have a democratic vote. So people will choose what will be the best ethics, what type of ethics they want in the area. And when the car drive into this area, it will automatically take this ethics and behave the way the citizen of that area voted for. And unfortunately, I don't have time to go through all type of different research or idea, but if you're interested, I invite you to go to this following website. And here there's different examples of or we could imagine to design ethics into this product. So for example, by open source, where you can imagine there's different communities that alter the software depending on their belief, or teaching ethical principle to neural network, or using crowdsourcing technology to have people remotely controlling an object depending on some parameters that you choose. But yeah, if you are interested, you can check this website. Yeah. Now, just a quick word of about the industry. So, as it was mentioned, I'm working for the automotive industry. So, all the industry is dealing with this ethical issue. So, the short answer is they don't deal with ethical issue at all, unfortunately. The point now is to try to make vehicle as safe as possible. So, that's the main objective. And what they say is they want to reach a positive balance of risk, which means if the autonomous vehicle is safer than an actual manual vehicle, then we reach this positive balance of risk. So there's still risk, of course, involved with autonomous vehicle, but if it's safer than the new product is safer than the previous one, then you have reached this positive balance of risk. But as I say, ethics is not at the scope in the moment because it's it will maybe somehow put into trouble the whole development of autonomous vehicle, because there's no, as I said, there's no proper answer for how you can incorporate ethics into an autonomous vehicle. And if you start to consider this kind of question, then it's better to simply stop the development of autonomous vehicle, right? But we see some the start of worry from government, for example. So Germany in 2017 was the first country in the world to draft the first ethical guideline for self-driving cars. So it's very abstract, so we cannot do much about it for now, but it's still a very good sign to show that the governments are starting to take care into that, and that the citizen as well. I think actually China as well say the plan as well to drive such type of ethical guideline for autonomous car. So yeah, so what's the point of all of it? So why should we think about ethics, or why I'm speaking about that if it's not even implemented into the industry, right? I think because as designer, of course, when you work for the industry, you make design product, and of course, we already know a lot of these products, of course, have benefits, but they have as well unintended consequence, and that's why it's very important for a designer to be aware of this consequence, so they can try to design a better product to avoid it going to make too much trouble on launch into the market. So, for example, how the system is going to behave. So, when you think about when you find this unintended consequence, then it will help you to design the product. So, for example, or it's going to affect the design of the product. So, how the system is going to behave, what shape it should have, or it should communicate to user outside, or what type of control the user will have over the system. So in the end, it's about designing a least worst product, because the end product is not going to be great, it's going to cause a lot of issue. But then, or if you think about this unintended consequence, or you can try to design something which is least worst that is planned to be. Yeah, thank you for listening.
Okay, thank you, Matthew. It's quite interesting method of your survey and research. Can you explain more about your those very complicated framework? You have a slideshow. Yes, and with, I think it's with the example you give us about the automobile working, and it's a very,
This one?
I think that's, yes, that one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so here it was more about, so it was in 2012, so it was quite a long time ago. So it was when we were starting to, at that time, not that much people were speaking about machine ethics publicly. So the idea there was to try to find what could be issue caused by algorithm, and one things that came out was machine ethics could be a quite big issue in the near future, especially with autonomous vehicle. And here the idea of this project was to try to show to people that what will happen if you start to put ethical ideologies into autonomous vehicle, because even a humanist, for example, algorithm, which seems nice because it tries to share damage among everybody, it still have some how to say bad consequence, or it gives the question, okay, can you really let a machine take this type of or make this kind of decision? Is it really something we want to have? So this project was really to try to illustrate this issue that will come in the near future when autonomous product might be involved in car crash that could involve the death of people.
Oh, okay, wow.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, there's a question from the audience.
Mm-hmm.
In your opinion, which ethical principle should be put in autonomous vehicles?
I think one of the best answers I found so far, or that a lot of people told me, is to have a random decision. So you don't take any party, you just let the system have a random to do something random, a bit like human. Because then otherwise you start to go into this very complex problem, which is, okay, what ethical ideology should we put? And this we don't know, because this problem of what ethic is the best is something debated for millennia by people. So we cannot now say, okay, we should have every product working on the consequentialist type of ethic or something like that. So I found out that the random output so far maybe would be the most appropriate one. Yeah.
Oh, so you trust the random outcome, right?
Yeah, I think will be the best, the one to try to mimic the most. So of course, if you can detect that, if the system can detect that nobody is injured, of course you should choose that. But in the case where everybody is injured, then you enter into this very complicated debate of choosing an ethical ideology, and therefore my own opinion is that the random output is maybe so far maybe the best one, but that's just a personal opinion, of course.
Quite interesting, very interesting. Yes. Okay. There's another question from the audience. What is your definition of designing futures? It's a big one.
Yeah, I think different people have different, of course, interpretation of it. And I think, as I was explaining at first, designing future for me is to really try to anticipate what could be the potential issue that we're designing, that we're creating. So look at emerging technologies and try to guess, okay, what this technology, or if it behaves, if it's launched into the world, how it's going to affect the world, and what type of issue it could bring, and then how can I design the products in order to avoid that this issue are going to happen on its launch to the market. So yeah, I think this is my own definition, at least for working into the industry, is the one I try to follow, or try to, yeah.
Okay, well, I think your research is quite important, and it's very valuable for the future, for the product design. And there's a curiosity. Is there really a difference among those different religions, cultures, when they think about ethical problems, the ethic?
So actually, I remember when I was doing this, sometime I was giving talk or workshop, and I remember one time in Europe and sometime in China. And I remember in China, for example, people tend to be really very utilitarianist. So to really look at the consequence of the to say, okay, it's better to save 5. So when I was giving this trolley dilemma, there were always, I think, 99% in the room. Every time people were thinking it's better to choose to save 5 people out of 1. While if you do that in Europe, because maybe religion, the Christian religion, has a more important part into when we grow up, or at least when I was kid, like 30 years ago. So maybe people will you will have maybe more like 50% of people saying it's better to pull the lever, and the 50 other percent to not to. So you can really there's of course different
Oh, that's very interesting. Yeah, I would choose the one actually.
The utilitarist one.
Yeah.
Okay, so.
Okay. Thank you very much, Matthew. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks to you. Thanks to you. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, we'll move to our last guest speaker. Is Elliott Montgomery. I'm sorry. Okay, Elliott is a designer, a design researcher, and a strategic and educator who focus on speculative inquiries about the confluence of social, technology, and environmental impact. He is associate director of Master of Fine Arts Transdisciplinary Design Program and assistant professor of strategic design at Parsons School of Design, the New School. He is also the co-founder of the Extrapolation Factory and the Design Future Research Studio based in Brooklyn. Welcome, Elliott, and very much look forward to your talk. Yeah, hand over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much for the invitation. So let's see. Can you see my screen?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, great. Yeah, so I'm very glad to be here. As you introduced me, my name is Eliott Montgomery. I'm an assistant professor at Parsons, the New School in New York City. And I also am the co-founder of a design futures practice called the Extrapolation Factory, which I co-founded with my collaborator, Chris Wobkin. Today's talk is going to be focused around maybe linguistic and theoretical notions of speculative design and some of the related fields. And I think this is very interesting to me, and it's been a valuable conversation to have with many colleagues and students, in part because so much of what we're doing really is new, and we're trying to find ways to communicate it to a ranging and constantly growing group of practitioners, audience members, etc. And so maybe we can start off just by asking the question that you just asked Matthew, which is, what are futures, or design futures in his case? And so I want to share my own thoughts on this question. So I think futures are really fictions that we create to help us do several things. We create fictions as futures to help us craft visions. So essentially imagining what futures could be, to shape discourse, so to start to cause discussion and to think about how that discussion happens, to build consensus, to bring people together, and then eventually to serve as the foundation for formulating our plans, thinking about how we turn futures and vision into some kind of action or strategy. So if we think of futures really as these fictional images or projections that we are constantly making in the present, as opposed to some destination that we could arrive in, that changes a lot of times the way we think about what a future can be. There is no singular future. We're constantly concocting, creating visions of possible futures. And so these narratives or images or projections then coexist in a multiplicity. I'm sure that the audience is familiar with the work of Clem Vezel and Joseph Boros. This is the kind of iconic futures cones diagram where we look from probable to impossible and the various spaces in between. And I think this is a really useful diagram, but I've been working with my students to try to understand how this might not necessarily reflect all of our theoretical understandings of what futures actually are. So first of all, it's misleading to think that we're all starting in the same place, and that actually history plays an important role in our images and projections of futures. So I think there should be something to the left of this diagram. There's also something a bit peculiar about the way this diagram stops very cleanly at one single point in time. Actually, I think when we talk about futures, they are much more blended and ongoing. They're not singular points in time, maybe 2030, 2040, 2050. It's a mix of different experiences that people have. And lastly, if futures truly are these imagined projections, these fictions, they are constrained by our imagination. We can only imagine so much. And so I've been working on proposing an alternative version of this diagram, which starts to incorporate some of these issues. So it reflects the long past that helps to lead us to where we are in the present, as well as to help us think about how very kind of singular time horizon like 2030, 2040 really isn't the end of our futures work. It's really just a stopping point, a moment to take a pause. And then as we look forward, we start to see the limits of our imagination. We can only imagine so far into a probable future before we're not sure what probable really is. We don't know whether something is plausible beyond a certain point. And so this diagram intends to kind of demonstrate the limits of what we can imagine as individuals. It's not to say that everybody has the same limits to their imagination. I think imagination is in some way like a muscle, and we can train that muscle. We can stretch our imaginations and grow those, but certainly we all have different limits that we work with. So to continue forward, I want to introduce the work of several colleagues and mentors that I've had in the past to help us frame what we're talking about when we talk about speculative design, discursive design, critical design, all these terms that float around some of the same areas. Again, I'm guessing that many of the audience members are familiar with the work of Dunn and Raby. The AB list is one of the very useful visualizations of ways we think about changing the role of design from the current version to some kind of alternative version, from affirmative to critical, etc. Another one that is useful to look at in this context is the work of Bruce and Stephanie Tharp. And they recently published the book Discursive Design. And before that, they had already proposed these 4 fields of design, starting with commercial, the creation of design artifice as a way to essentially generate revenue and very basically solve problems. The second one, the responsible, where the objective of the design work is not so much to make money, but rather to have some kind of impact, and what responsibility is and the ethics behind this. I'm sure Matthew and many others can offer a lot here. What is our role as social actants? But the objective here is no longer about making money, it's about making social change. The third order in the bottom left, the experimental. This is a space in which we're looking at design as a way to really just find new ways of understanding our world. In this example, we see a series of design objects that were created in collaboration with different animals. So what if we invite a mouse to help us design the wallpaper by chewing through the paper? Or the snake is designing a lamp by wrapping itself around a soft piece of clay. These are experiments in materiality. They don't necessarily propose a different fundamental notion of identity or self or humanity, but they certainly allow us to play with what we think of as design. And then the fourth and final domain is the discursive, as the Tharps put it. This is the space in which the design's work is really set up to ask questions and shape the discourse that we have about emerging issues and problems, etc. I think this is a really useful definition to work with. I've been starting to lay out some of the spaces that various practitioners work within. And oftentimes students ask me, so is speculative design art or design? And I think the only fair way to answer is that it is really a combination of both. It probably sits somewhere between art and design, where art has this level of unconstraint. An artist may really do anything and consider it art as long as they feel comfortable considering it art. In the design world, there are more preconceived notions that society imposes on designers in terms of what is and what is not design. And that's changing over the years, but there are more constraints in the field of design than there are in art. Speculative design works within some of those constraints, but also incorporates a playfulness that we find in art that may not exist always in design. To build into this diagram, I think there's a role of strategy that's involved in some of the speculative design works. As I said before, oftentimes futures are actually helping us plan or envision a strategic direction forward. Not all speculative design is strategic, and not all of speculative design is oriented around futures. We know that there is a long history of practice and research in the field of future studies, and that's existed long before the world of speculative design and discursive design have come about. Some of the work that happens in the world of speculative design is actually not futures oriented, right? There are examples of speculative histories or alternative presents, or projects that defy notions of time altogether. So futures oriented work is a small part of speculative design. And within all of these different spaces, we see the various approaches to doing speculative design, critical design, design fiction, discursive design, design futures, etc. And each one kind of takes a different piece of this puzzle and starts to work with it. So a lot of the work that I do is in the space of design futures. We're really combining a lot of the work that's happened in the field of future studies and linking it with these notions of strategy, design, moving away from some of the unconstrained qualities of art. But there may be moments where this diagram actually reshuffles and we see design futures becoming art yet again. It's important to say that I see these as approaches, not as individuals. So one person might be making art in one project and might be making critical design in the next project, and then doing design thinking in a third. I think these are really ways of engaging with challenges, with systems, as opposed to an individual or a title. So moving forward, I think it's maybe helpful for me just to situate the work that I'm doing in some of the practice that I run. As I mentioned, I'm the co-founder of the Extrapolation Factory with my collaborator, Chris Wobkin. And so I just wanted to show one project from that practice for those who don't know the work. I'm guessing many of you do. I'll share this project, which we call 99-cent Futures, which Chris and I did as we were founding the practice. And the project really uses the context of design fiction and especially design futures to question how we might reconceive our notions of consumerism in America. You're probably familiar with the dollar stores that exist in US. There are similar types of stores around the world where you can find all sorts of items for a low price. In this example of the dollar store items that one can shop for, you can find things that were made thousands of years ago. So the toothpick is an invention of thousands of years ago. And the latest iPhone cover is an invention that really only responds to a problem of the present day. And then each one of these objects speaks to a different moment in human history. So we invited a group of folks to come together and imagine the objects that you could find in a future dollar store and to go through a design futures process in order to arrive at these ideas. The workshop delivered many different concepts, one of which is this proposal that we might live in a world where you can go into a store and pay with RMB and get dollars in return. Or maybe you're paying with an Indian rupee and you're getting pesos in return. So as global currencies start to become more fluid, how do we ensure that we're getting the right amount of money back at that store? There were, in fact, lots of different concepts that came out, and we replicated those and took them to a dollar store in New York City and hung the future concepts on the wall right next to some of the original genuine concepts, products that you could find in the dollar store. And then shoppers came in and were able to actually buy these objects from futures. And each time they were imagining how they would like to live in that world. So returning to the question I was asking earlier about how we describe the work that we do, what is the language of the speculative design or design futures work that we're using? And I had shared this diagram. I think a lot of the work that you see in the world of design fiction and design futures moves us from something that's impossible into the world that's possible. And I think this is interesting, but I think there are problems with this in that it's hard for many of us to rationalize the utility of concocting the impossible now. So from the 99-cent futures project, here's an example of an impossible object, a full university degree while you sleep, where you plug this into your ear and you wake up the next morning knowing astrophysics. This is impossible today, but maybe it could be possible at some point in a future. Here's a project from Jaemin Pak. This is proposing a new social etiquette when we all live to 150 years old. This is impossible today, but maybe it is possible in a future. This is a project by Ai Hasegawa. A beautiful project. It imagines a scenario in which we could give birth to a species other than human. And this is currently impossible, but it could be possible in some future. Lastly, by Dunn and Raby, a scenario in which we biomodify our bodies in order to allow us to perform certain functions with likeness of superpower. So these are all examples of moving from the impossible into the possible space in some future. I'm proposing that maybe we need to look at ways to bend social rules in order to move from the possible into the probable. So this is a slight twist, but I think it's an important one. So we'll come back to the currency converter. This is an object that has all the technological demands of the present world. We could make this today if we wanted to. And so it's less a matter of whether it should exist and more a matter of what it would be like if this does exist. We can make this now and then start to play with the possible worlds that it enables. So I'll go through a few examples of experiments and then maybe we can take some questions. This is a project by Adam Harvey, and he's proposing that we might just change the way we apply makeup to our faces to deceive the image recognition systems in our worlds around us. So if an artificial intelligence can identify your face, if you were to apply makeup in a certain way, maybe like this or this, you can actually deceive the camera. The camera will no longer be able to see you as a person or maybe identify your own individuality. This project really doesn't propose any new technology. It's purely suggesting a new social rule, a new way of dressing ourselves in order to engage with a technological issue. This next project by Lina Kovacic is a project for those who are living in these hyper online environments. And here, Lina is actually suggesting that we have dinner sets that enable us to have romantic engagements online. You can see there are wires connected to the earbuds. This is an older project, but this project is not proposing any new technology. It's purely suggesting a new behavior, a new etiquette. Right now, we still think of a romantic engagement really being one where we're together in person. But are there ways that we can change our notions of romance in order to adapt to new social rules? This is a project by Heather Dewey-Hagborg, Stranger Visions, in which she's suggesting that there might be a world in which we're having our DNA that we leave behind us in the streets of our cities being picked up and turned into evidence of where we've been. These are images on the right, the 3D prints of DNA samples that she was able to collect on the streets of New York City. So on the left, you can see a cigarette butt, and that actually contains some of the DNA of the people who she attempted to build the likeness of on the right. And the last project that I'll share here is a project by a group from Parsons, Andrea, Ricardo, and Stephanie, who proposed that we might start to change the way we think about commute times in order to deal with some of the massive issues of congestion in our cities. So instead of having everybody commuting at one time, we could actually introduce different time zones within one place. So we might have 3 different time zones in a city like New York. Some people are waking up super early and some people are going to bed super late. And there might even be a New York City agency that's dedicated to managing people's different time zones. So in each one of these project examples, we see scenarios in which we're not changing the physics of our world, where we're not introducing the impossible. We're purely looking at ways that we can change the social rules that we abide by in order to question the way we engage with one another. So maybe I can stop there and invite questions.
Okay, thank you, Elliot. There are some questions, actually. Thank you very much.
Very good.
What do you think is the role of playfulness in future work?
Yeah, so I think playfulness is critical to doing work in the field of future studies and speculative design. And part of the reason is because we oftentimes think of our futures as being these very delicate matters, right? Imagining a future is the work of someone who's well-trained or someone who has experience. We elect officials in public office, oftentimes with their experience and capacity to work on changing our futures. But actually, I think this is a problem. I think we need to open up the space for futures dreaming and futures visioning to all sorts of people. And playfulness allows us to dial down the seriousness with which we engage with these narratives of futures. When we're playful, we're also able to move away from the immediate problem that's in front of us and start to dream of other possibilities. And this references some work that was developed by Barbara Fredrickson, who's looking at evolutionary theory. When we move into a space of like emotional positivity, we're able to actually think about long-term scenarios instead of focusing on the immediate threats around us. So play is super important when we're doing futures work.
Yeah, great. Yeah, totally agree. And there's another question from the audience. What makes a good speculative or future project?
Yeah, so this goes back to the point I was making earlier in the presentation. When we do futures work, oftentimes what we're doing is making space for discussions to happen. I think this discursive nature of futures work and speculative design really is one of its most powerful assets. And so if we look at the types of discussions that are happening after the creation of a futures project, and we're able to identify new threads in that discussion, or the discussion feels distinct in some way from discussions that were happening before, I think we can start to agree that that project has opened up a new space for discussion. It's actually enabling a new way of thinking. And so that, I think, is a good metric for understanding what makes high quality of speculative design or futures work. Are we getting into significantly new discussions? And are they helping us to reframe our relationships to the present?
Okay, I have a question. It's about education, actually, because I think you do so many field of design is like it's not only product or special design, but it's a totally new way to think about design. So how do you guys organize the curriculum or the course?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, honestly, we think of these approaches, speculative design and design futures, as assets that designers have as they go into any problem-solving context. So instead of thinking of one individual as a speculative designer, or even shaping a program around speculative design, it feels more productive to shape a program around transdisciplinary thinking and transdisciplinary practice, and then introduce many different disciplines and really imagine the designer as a person who's able to move from discipline to discipline and to bring them together. So the designer is almost like a conductor in a symphony who has a deep knowledge of all the different disciplines, as opposed to someone who is going to be a specialist in a single discipline. This builds on the history of design, where we think of designers really as folks with a process that might enable them to work on everything from a toothpaste tube to a jet plane. This is, you know, following on the work of those coming out of IDEO and the D School, those who crafted the notions of design thinking. But actually, if we move on from context agnosticism to discipline agnosticism, and we're able to start to move between disciplines and absorb from one discipline and bring that value into another, or vice versa, that's actually a really powerful way of operating.
Yeah, I think that's really great, and I think, well, my next question will be, how do the students start their career?
Yeah, there's no one way, of course. You know, all of our students come from different backgrounds. We have students who are coming from design and non-design backgrounds in the transdisciplinary design program. And so when students are heading out into the field after graduating, oftentimes we see them either building on things that they have done prior to coming into the program, or finding ways to merge what they had done with something that happened in the program, some kind of new area of expertise or field of interest. Usually when students are going into the field, they're combining some strategic capacity with some technical capacity. And I think this is really important. Finding a way to contribute to design projects, both through the high level vision, as well as being able to be hands-on, to be in the field, to be talking with individuals and understanding what's happening in a specific context, and then backing up and looking at the world from the view of the pilot of the airplane, thinking about the strategic long-term, and thinking about how we're going to land the plane is all critical.
Wow, sounds great. Wow. Yeah, it's really amazing program, actually. Do you have any website or can share with our audience so we can take further looking at your program? Because
absolutely.
It's quite interesting, and it's
I'll
marvelous.
be glad to share that. Sure.
That's great. Okay, thank you, Elliot. And I think that's all for you.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, so let's see. I think that's all for this section, and thank you to the speakers for bringing us this enlightening speeches. And I will hand over to you. I think will be Professor, who I'm going to hand over.
Yeah. Finish with the next session about the events. Yeah. Thank you, Professor Liang Wen, and all the speakers of session Futures Creation. That's a wonderful speech. Thank you. Okay. Let's move the move on to the last session of the day, launch the Global Design Futures Network. And firstly, I want to introduce Professor Fu Zhiyong. He is Associate Professor of Information Art and Design Department, Academy of Arts and Design, Tsinghua University. Okay, welcome Professor Fu to launch the.
Okay. I will share something special. So actually, this is the second year we organize this conference. So to looking for some like long-term goals. So I just discussed with my friends Peter Scupoli from Carnegie Mellon University and Babla from Polytechnic Milano. So can we launch some network? So this the network we named the Global Design Futures Network. Next. Cool. Okay, there will be a video. So our goal is to create a network to connect the diverse design futures community, and that spans multiple related fields such as history, futurology, art, design, philosophy, sociology, and so forth. Okay, I think there are a video, but without the sound, right? Okay, let's move to the next. Okay, so our value position, the first one is lead. Experts from around the world join together to responsible further the elevate the mission of education. We explore possible future in our rapidly changed world from both global and local perspective. And so next. It's so the next one is a hybrid. As an interdisciplinary field, design futures combine multiple related fields to design futures, including philosophy, aesthetics, art, design, futurology, sociology, and other interdisciplinary fields to discuss method and advanced theories for designing desirable and suitable future. So the last, our value is succeed. We live in the unforeseen era, confusion and paradoxical situation abound. On one hand, we have witnessed the incredible advance in technology, health and well-being, and so forth. And on the other hand, we are facing planetary level existential threats, climate emergency, income inequality, and environmental degradation, and so forth. Okay, there will be new slides. Okay, we gathered the Global Design Futures Network community members from various disciplinaries to achieve the vigorous development of future-centered disciplinary of design. Okay, next. Okay, so the vision and the mission. So we believe that innovation and creativity help respond towards engaging with complex social issues such as amidst the rapid global changes. On the other hand, we have witnessed the incredible advance in technology, health, well-being, and so forth. On the other hand, we are facing planetary level existential threats, climate emergency, income, inequality, environmental degradation, and so forth. Okay, so therefore, the future community combine multiple field and the disciplinary perspective ranging from philosophy, aesthetics, art, design, sociology, and other fields to think about how to anticipate and respond to complex social issue. We use an innovation-centered design approach. Okay, next. So we are admitted to provide academic exchange platform for educators, researchers, practitioners, students, and other innovators in related fields around the world to explore advanced theory and discuss future-centered directions. Next. So here's a group composed of students, researchers, professors, professionals, and related organizations in related disciplinary such as design, futurology, sociology, and philosophy. Okay. So the last slide. Okay, we'll provide National Cooperation Network platform for exploring advanced theory and discuss further future directions. We promote academic exchange and cooperative research among educators, researchers, practitioners, students, and other cross-innovators in related field around the world, and assume that the role of bridge for academic exchanges. Okay. Okay, the benefit of membership will carry out international academic exchanges and cooperation through seminars, study meeting, lecture, international conference, etc. We also edit and publish academic journals that reflect the advanced theory of the discipline and list trends in industrial research. Okay, network members will be able to share and communicate academically and publish papers on the platform we provide through various academic exchange activity. We help members improve their academic level and the social status. We also assist members in part-time job, academic exchange, and entrepreneurship in universities and research institutes in various countries. Help our members grow together in related field. Okay, we are also very happy to launch another studio. It's Design Future Studio in Milan, which is established by China-Italy Design Innovation Hub. And we think this studio will provide all the function of our network. Okay. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Professor Fu. Can't waiting for the fourth story. We will appreciate if you could continue to pay attention to this project. Thank you. That's all the speech of today have been finished. And I'm glad to introduce the rest session of the ICDF 2021 coming tomorrow and the next weekend. In tomorrow morning, we will hold a conference academic symposium where more than 20 young design soldiers and PhD students will be invited to share the topic of their papers at 9 a.m. in Beijing time. And in the afternoon, we have 2 idea slides on future arts, futures art and future literacy. There will be streamed on same platform as this conference between 1 to 3 p.m. and 3 to 5 p.m. Here is next Saturday on November 13th. There will be 5 keynote speakers and 8 panelists speech. We'll have both in English and Chinese like today. Look forward to watching the rest of conference. If you want to know more about the ICDF 2021, please check the website as follow. I'll screen the QR code on the screen. Okay, see you tomorrow and good night. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. See you tomorrow.
See you. Maybe everyone can open the screen and open the camera. Maybe we can take a photo. Oh. So thank you a lot.
So this will be our team, our committee team.
Yeah. It's okay.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you all.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you. Good night, everyone.
Good night and good day.
Good day.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.